Hello, my name is Donte Tanner with Virginians for Electoral Justice. Today we have a roundtable here for you because there's a lot of questions that came out after the 2017 race. When you start looking at the process, a lot of good news happened. Took over 15 seats in the House of Delegates, and there's a lot of good things to celebrate in that process. But there were 3 races that went to recount, 2 of which had a lot of questions. Fortunately for my race, I was one of the ones who went through a recount, and in my race, it showed how the process was supposed to work. I went to bed that night thinking I had won by 68 votes, but thanks to the process itself, we found out there were errors in the situation. So I had a lot of questions about how the process itself worked, but then again, I knew it was working because everybody said that yes, the lawyers were there, both sides agreed, and I called my opponent and said the same thing, that we agreed that the process worked. But when you start looking at the other 2 House races, especially with Josh Cole and Shelley Simons, there was a lot of questions that happened, a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of things that we felt like we could have done differently before the race, before the election, and after. So one of the questions that kept coming up was, how does a vote become a vote? What does that process look like? And what can we do differently next time to be more prepared so that something like this doesn't happen? So, of course, I am definitely not the smart person on the subject, so I invited some friends with me. And we have a great panel, a roundtable discussion. One more will be joining us later on, but let me give a brief introduction to everyone here. To my left, we have Gene Rossi, who ran for lieutenant governor last year in the primary. Fantastic candidate, taught me a lot about how to run and how to give our stump speeches and be involved in that process. He's also, again, a recognized expert in trial advocacy, has been a teacher for over 20 years. He has trained thousands of federal prosecutors and agents, and he's a trial instructor at Harvard Law School and teaches at Constitutional Law at George Mason University in Fairfax. Right next to him, of course, we have Mr. Jack Young, the gentleman, the professor. He's the current chair of the American Bar Association, senior lawyer division. He's known for his work in election law and election recounts, and currently sits in the advisory committee of the William & Mary Election Law Program. He received the 2017 Election Law Educator of the Year. That's why we call him the professor. And he's been an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh Law School and George Mason School of Law. To my right, we have Tim Cywinski. Sorry about
Happens
that.
all the time.
All right. He's the director of engagement at Virginia 21, and he lobbies the legislator on millennial issues. He speaks to Virginia 21 chapters at the public colleges in Virginia, and he worked with the League of Women Voters and other groups to get millennials out to vote. This past year, again, called the 30% campaign, which encouraged millennials to identify the major issues to whoever became governor. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. So there's a mouthful there, and let's just get right to it and let me stop talking. But one of the questions, again, that came up during this whole process is, generally speaking, elections overview, what happens from the time that somebody registers to vote to the time their ballot is counted? What are the officials, what offices are responsible for it? Just generally speaking, what goes on in that process? And I'll kick this first question over to the professor.
It's at the beginning is registration. To vote in Virginia, you have to register. That is an obligation that's put on the voter. From registration, a couple of things then can happen. If you are going to be here on election day, you vote in person. If you are not going to be in the Commonwealth on election day, you can vote absentee. In Virginia, absentee balloting is for cause. You file an application with the local city or county board. You then get a ballot, which you must return by the end of election day. The one exception is our overseas and military service people who will receive an application and a ballot within 45 days of the election. Those also need to be returned before the end of election day, 7 o'clock on election day. On election day, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we now vote by what's called paper ballots. They are ballots that are filled in like the SAT or anything else that has bubbles. The bubbles are supposed to be filled in fully and completely. They are read by a machine, a MarkSense reader, and then the ballots are stored in the bin below the reader. On election night, we have what are unofficial results. And in the Commonwealth, we are notorious for those results not being representative of the final election results. We have, for example, instances in the Attorney General's race a few years back of large swings in the election night results. After the election is over, each county and city holds a canvass. It's where all the ballots are brought to a central location and are then reviewed, and it is that point that the county electoral board issues its final results. It's the final results that are the first time we know who's a winner. Now, those results still are not final. They are sent to the State Board of Elections, which reviews the results from the 132 counties and cities within the Commonwealth, and then issues the certification. It's usually right after Thanksgiving. Once the state board certifies the results of each and every race, a losing candidate has the right to file for a recount. The general rule is that a recount is necessary if it's within, the difference is within 1%. The state will pay the cost if it's within 0.5%. A recount is exactly what that word says. It is a reassessment of what was done at the canvass, with one exception, and that is that we can look at the actual ballots that were cast, and they are hand counted.
So I'm going to break in real quick with a question on that one. So you say during the recount process, they are recounted by hand, all the ballots still cast into every one of them?
Under the statute, 24.2801, paper ballots, which these are hand counted. In 2002, following the election in 2000 in Florida, the State Board of Elections under then Secretary Cameron Quinn put together a series of standards. They're pictograms. Pictograms are simple representations of various ballots, how they should be counted, so that we would have predetermined standards. Because one of the problems in 2000 was there were no standards to be applied in the Florida recount. Here, the state now has a series of standards. They are part of what we say is the rule of law, being made up of predetermined standards decided by independent arbiters, regardless of party. In one of the recounts that was recent, that standard was put to the test when a lone ballot was presented late in the process that had been counted for a candidate, and the three-judge court later determined that it should not have been. Recounts are then a redetermination of what happened. It's not a place to challenge whether absentee ballots or provisional ballots were appropriate. It is simply a re-auditing of the numbers. The three-judge court, which has been chosen by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia, made up of a judge in the county in which the election was held, and then two judges from distant circuits. The decision of the three-judge court is final. It is not reviewable. Following a recount, a losing candidate can request a contest. A contest is decided by the House of the General Assembly for which the individual is running. It is subject, obviously, to the political forces. So the control of the House by either party is important. We have in Virginia very rarely, if ever, had a contest. Now, one of the things that can happen in any election, including a recount, is if the election results, the official results, are tied, that is a dead even tie, the Code of Virginia provides that the candidate is chosen by lot, either pulling names out of a hat, flip of a coin. That has happened from time to time in the Commonwealth. It is not a necessarily unusual process, a little bit arbitrary, but there needs to be a process to determine ties. In the present statute, the loser of a coin flip has a right to seek a recount, and that can result in a second coin flip. Generally does not happen because at that point there is political exhaustion, and usually the losing candidate decides that there is no goodwill left in pursuing that outcome.
So real quick on that point, and that's actually a great pause point in terms of what happened down in Shelley Simon's race. A lot of folks were asking, why didn't she continue to fight on? And so you're saying that becomes that conversation of goodwill exhaustion, political exhaustion. I know running for office is not easy.
Well, I want
at
to
all.
comment.
Yeah, please do.
No offense to the professor. I want to go to this three-judge panel that was appointed in the Simons case. And if I had the power, either as a governor, lieutenant governor, or legislature, here's what I would change today. One of the judges on that three-judge panel had what I considered a conflict of interest. He had been promoted and pushed by one of the candidates in the race, Shelley Simon's opponent. I forgot his name.
Yancey.
Yancey.
Yeah.
I apologize to Delegate Yancey. There's nothing wrong with Yancey did in getting him to become a judge. But when your judge, who you sponsored, whom you promoted, whom you supported, is now on the panel that decides whether that extra ballot would be counted, that's a conflict of interest. And if I had the power right now, here's what I would do. I would have a judge on that panel who has no connection to the district. As a matter of fact, is 200 miles away, so you don't have any conflict of interest. I believe in the integrity of the system, and that process, frankly, smelled because of that.
Was that conflict raised at the time?
Nobody raised it.
Well, there's the problem.
Nobody raised it. Professor, no.
That's the problem.
I agree. Nobody raised it.
Why not?
I'm raising it.
Why, I mean,
because I think it was a big problem. There may have been a couple editorials, but it looks bad. It looks bad.
But I agree.
Thank you.
Except in our adversary process, if no one raised it, that is particularly if the Democratic candidate did not raise it, I think it's unfair to criticize the court for a conflict that wasn't raised. It sounds like it was an obvious conflict, and it sounds like it was something that was known. One of the problems in this whole area is there are not a great deal of lawyers that are schooled in the recount process, and many lawyers that get involved simply aren't up to the task. It sounds like here an opportunity was missed to raise the conflict, and that conflict should have been raised at the preliminary hearing, which is held under Section 801 of Title 24.2.
Professor, I want to make it clear. I'm not saying that judge did anything improper. I'm not challenging his integrity. I'm just saying that it looks bad, and there is an appearance of a conflict when you have a judge who was promoted by one of the candidates. It goes back to the Supreme Court. I thought it looked bad when Justice Antonin Scalia didn't recuse him from a case in which Dick Cheney was a party. And he used to go hunting with Dick Cheney. It just looks bad.
But let's go back to something you said beforehand in terms of people not understanding the recount process.